You like mysteries? Yeah, me too. Who doesn't? And as mysteries go, there's a genre for every taste, right? There's murder mysteries, sci-fi mysteries, real mysteries, and for the 80s fans out there, unsolved mysteries. In aviation, well, we've got no lack of them to wonder about. But one mystery probably stands out above the rest. And the story has a little bit of everything, because we know so little about what actually happened, and we can only wonder if there's more to it than just a simple plane crash. Was there jealousy, sabotage, something more? Well, nobody knows for sure. And even though we've been actively looking since 1937, nobody's really turned up much. Now, though, there's a new generation searching for an answer to the biggest aviation mystery of all time. What caused the disappearance of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan? If you're at all interested in this topic, you've probably heard theory after theory about what happened. Everything from a simple navigation error to getting captured by the Japanese. And at this point, a few of those have been solidly debunked, but until somebody actually turns something up, every theory probably has at least some merit to it, right? So who's leading the chase? Well, nobody really. There isn't one person that's officially in charge of an expedition or anything, like on behalf of the people. But there are individuals emerging all the time who are willing to fund research or expeditions to test their hypotheses. What's cool is that in this day and age, getting the word out has never been easier. Self-produced media is everywhere, and a few people have come forward to provide a forum for those with some knowledge to share their findings with the rest of us. And when it comes to media projects dedicated to finding the answer, it's hard to do better than this guy.
My name is Chris Williamson. I'm the project director of Chasing Earhart.
Chris is a California native who's so all in on the project that he moved to Atchison, Kansas, the mecca for all things Amelia. But what's it like to live a life devoted to the search? And why? I mean, sure, it's one of aviation's biggest mysteries, but it's gone unanswered for so long. And how close are we to actually finding out what happened to her and Fred Noonan that fateful day? Stay tuned to find out. Actually, which I guess makes probably a really good first question for you then too, is how did you come into podcasting?
Well, podcasting has always been sort of cathartic for me. I was always a fan of podcasts in general. It was something that I always listened to. I've probably been listening to podcasts for the last 10 years. But as far as how I came into it professionally, it's a very interesting story because approximately 3 years ago, I had to go through heart surgery, and I had a cardiac ablation done, and there was some complication with that, and it was a very lengthy process, and I was down for several weeks. And after I was down for several weeks, I couldn't really do anything, so I started listening a little more heavier to some of my favorite podcasts that I had been sort of putting onto the back burner, as so many people that listen to podcasts do. They have hundreds of shows that they listen to, and they just never get around to doing it. I had suddenly 3 weeks of time that I really had nothing else to do with myself. I could just do whatever I wanted to do. And so I started listening to podcasts, and that's sort of how I got introduced more heavily into it. I was more of a casual listener up until that point, but I remember listening to a couple of podcasts in particular that really got me through that time. I suffered a lot of depression after that heart surgery. I was fairly young when I had it, and I was just really sort of in a dark place. And at the time, I was actually in the middle of doing pre-research for what would become Chasing Earhart and the podcast and everything that we're doing now. So podcasting it's sort of been ingrained in me for a very long time. But as far as, making podcasting a thing and actually kind of making the call to make Chasing Earhart, a lot about a podcast, it was kind of after that time that I made that decision. And I sort of got into doing it, making my own podcast show. And it was always going to be Chasing Earhart. That's how we started with everything. So it was sort of a personal story that got me into it, but the personal story sort of intertwines with the project, at least the research phase of it.
Sure. Well, I'm going to go ahead and guess that a lot of people probably heard of Chasing Earhart through your podcast. So that's really what I want to hear about is what is the Chasing Earhart project?
So the Chasing Earhart project is sort of twofold. It has always been, there's always been two tiers to it, but it to go back and kind of talk about how it evolved, it started out with the podcast. initially had this idea, and the idea was to create a project that was going to be the be all end all of Amelia Earhart projects. That was sort of my naivete at the time. I wanted to really kind of do a very deep dive into Amelia Earhart's life as well as the disappearance, because a lot of people focus so much on, the last 81 years of her life, or the last 81 years of the story, I should say, the disappearance. And not a lot of people focus too much on the little details of her life and the stories that no one really cares to tell. And, everybody knows about the records and about the transatlantic flight and about all the things she did. And she was a pioneer and an icon of her time. But I wanted to create a project that sort of encompassed the whole as opposed to the part. So it was very important to me to tell the story of Amelia Earhart from the cradle to the disappearance and beyond. And that was sort of the high level overview of what we were going to do. And we decided early on that it was going to be a podcast for practical reasons. I wanted to involve as many people as I could. The initial list, we talk about it all the time, was 25 names. I had 25 names on the initial list of folks that I wanted to reach out to and see if they would be willing to take part. And I remember telling myself at the time that if I could get these 25, or a good majority of these 25, I would consider the project to be a success. And as of right now, we're hovering a little over 240 people that are involved in the project. And it just sort of seemed to naturally evolve, and people wanted to get involved in it. People wanted to tell their story, whether it's a connection they had to Earhart on a private matter through family or something like that, or whether it's something that they've been working on for a very long time. So it just sort of evolved into this really robust project, and now it's the largest scale project ever on Amelia Earhart as far as sheer participation is involved. So Chasing Earhart Project is two things. It is a podcast that we've been working on for about a year and a half. We just released we're releasing episode 72 tonight. We've got probably 115 of those episodes recorded. And we've just kicked off a second podcast, which we can get into a little later if you'd like. And the documentary started filming about a year and a half ago as well. Initially, we weren't going to do a documentary. Initially, we were going to stick with the podcast. And we decided to kick off a documentary and do the documentary sort of in the same manner in which we were doing the podcast, only we would go really large scale. We would go documentary series as opposed to a 1 or 2 hour documentary. And that's what we started with then. We started interviewing folks and shooting interview segments for the documentary, and we've probably shot around 40 segments for that already, interview-wise, and we've probably got this year another 30 or 40 scheduled to shoot at that point. So it's a really robust project. It's a podcast. It's a documentary. It's a archive. It's a deep dive, the deepest dive ever into Amelia Earhart's life and her disappearance. That's really the best way to explain it in a nutshell. And I know it's a very long-winded way, but that's the quickest way I could explain it to you.
Well, to take on a project like that obviously would require more than just a passing interest in something. It would require something to be more than a hobby. So I want to hear about what actually possessed you to do this. Why Earhart? Why now? And why do you feel the compulsion to chase after her in this way?
Yeah, that's a good question. Earhart has been a part of me for as long as I can remember. Third grade is sort of the magic time when a lot of kids get introduced to Amelia Earhart, second and third grade. And as far back as I can remember, third grade was my first memory really of her. We had a History Day project that we were asked to do. And I remember very vividly my teacher put all of these 8x10 black and white photos on the wall, right, around the room. So we had all these kids that were going to basically pick a photo, sight unseen. Now, a lot of those folks, a lot of the people in the photos were very well known. You had your Martin Luther King Jr.'s, you had your Rosa Parks, you had Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Teddy Roosevelt. The list goes on and on and on and on. But there was a woman there that, it's a famous photo that everybody's seen. If you Google Amelia Earhart right now, Google image search Amelia Earhart, one of the first few images you'll see is the famous photo of her with her hands on her hips and the bomber jacket on her, and she's got that smirk on her face. And that photo was hanging on the wall, and I had no idea who that was, and I don't think anybody in the class knew who that was at the time. But I went ahead and picked that photo, and I remember that's sort of what started everything with me. I started looking into her life, and even as a kid, I remember thinking her life was really fascinating, and she was really someone that inspired me because she was daring and she was innovative, and she seemed to. I was a real scared kid when I was little. I had a lot of fear and about a lot of different things, and this is a woman that just seemed to have a masterful grasp on fear. And I was very attracted to that even as a child, maybe because I saw something in her that could help me with my inner fears. And did a project on her, loved it, and loved it so much I came back in fourth grade and did another one and another one and another one. I just kept doing them every year. And I remember as I got older and as I got into junior high and into high school, I started writing papers on her when the time called for it. And I used her in any way I could as far as an example and different things. And I ended up writing a dissertation on her in college, and I just kept going on it. And so she's always been sort of on my horizon. And oddly enough, I sort of stopped doing anything regarding Earhart for quite some time until about 2008, 2009, when I started doing pre-research and I had this sort of the spark of this idea that would become what we're doing now. So really, it's always been a lifelong thing. She's always sort of been kind of the other woman in my life, so to speak. Even now, it's one of those stories that just sort of grabs hold of you. She's got this incredibly fascinating life, and these stories that we're uncovering now that haven't been really told. And then she mysteriously disappears over the Pacific Ocean on July the 2nd, 1937. And after that, the story doesn't end. The story, you'd think that the story would end there, but that's when the story is just getting started, and it just sort of twists and turns, and it's been twisting and turning for 81 plus years now. And so it's one of those things that it really is, it can really become an obsession if you don't keep yourself in check, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, however you want to look at it. It can really become an obsession, and it can swallow you whole, like it has so many people. But for me, it's more along the lines of just this natural inquisitiveness about her career and her life and why she may have done the things that she did, the decisions that she made, what was she thinking at certain times, and trying to speak with all these experts that fill our project to see if I can get a better understanding of who she was as a person. And that is really what's kept me so enthralled in this case. Not so much the disappearance, but really just all these little stories that kind of make up the woman before she disappeared, which is just a totally different twist altogether at that point.
What does your family think about all this? Are they really into it too?
Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, no one's ever really asked me that before. They've always sort of known that I've been fascinated with Amelia's life, and she's been one of those people that I've always sort of talked about. But my wife is really just been amazing. She is our project coordinator for Chasing Earhart for Chris Evans Films. So she has taken on a role that has been really remarkable. She really handles all the things that I don't. She's sort of the heart and soul of the project. And when I told her about what I wanted to do, she was never not supportive. She was always, well, if that's something you really want to do, you should do it. And I remember I went out and did my first interview with a gentleman by the name of Todd Swindell, who I happen to have a lot of respect for. He was the first person I ever talked to. And I remember going out to the library in Alhambra, California, and doing an interview with him. I shot an interview on camera with him, very gracious with his time, and he opened up to me and talked to me about his hypothesis and the work that he's put in on this. And after that interview, I was really hooked. I knew I wanted to do it before the interview, but it was one of those situations where I wanted to test the waters and see sort of how I felt and see if there's something I really wanted to kind of commit to, because I knew it was going to be a really big commitment if I was going to dive into this. And I think it was really a credit to Todd and his generosity with his time and his willingness to speak with me that really sort of helped me want to make the commitment. And when I told my wife about it, she said, okay, I'm in with you all the way. If you want to do this, let's do this. And she went at it 100%, as she does everything in her life, and she gives it her all, and she's just incredible, and she's come on board and run our project. And really, when we decided to move from Southern California to Atchison, Kansas, so it really it's like a whole nother world. You're down in Southern California. She's lived there all her life. All her family and friends are there. She's never known anything else besides that. And I remember we came out to Atchison, Kansas for the 2017 Amelia Earhart Festival to film interviews, which we did. We filmed like, 15, 20 interviews or whatever, something like that. And we got an offer to move out here. And when we received that offer, I remember turning to her on the way home, on the way back to the hotel that we were staying at while we were here. And I said, we're leaving California in 60 days. And she was a little scared at first, but, to her credit, she put her money where her mouth was, and she said, I'm in till it's over. And so she's been very supportive, and I couldn't ask for a better wife and a better partner, not only in our marriage, but just in this project. She's been wonderful. And my little boy is 9 years old, and he's just rolls with the punches. He's, wherever we're at, he's happy to be at, and he's evolved and he's done really well. And it's just been a great experience so far on that front. I cannot ask for a better family to be with me on this journey, and they've all been supportive. I have nothing I can say that's negative towards anyone that's in my inner circle that's been around us throughout this project at all.
Well, yeah, to leave Southern California to move to Kansas, you better mean it.
Yes, absolutely, and she did, and we've been here for about a year and a half now, and we'll probably be here for at least another year or so until this thing's wrapped up. So she's been very great. I can't praise her enough.
Wow. Are you guys going to come back home after the project is over? Or are you going to stay out there?
That's a good question. We've talked about that. We've talked about staying out here. We've talked about buying a home out here. The cost of living is so much better out here. It's so much more affordable. I have a really great job out here. I do work a day job, and I'm out here, and we're doing good. Our quality of life has been really great. I want to really leave that up to her. She made a huge sacrifice in taking this project on, and she moved out here without any hesitation. And I think I've told her several times, the least I can do when this project is done is let you decide, where do you want to be? Do you want to stay out here? Do you want to move home to California? What do you want to do? And she's still deciding on that. So I'll to be continued there. We'll find out.
So why Atchison, Kansas? Why does that seem to be such a ground zero for Amelia Earhart stuff?
Yeah, Atchison is really Mecca for Amelia Earhart. We love it out here. It's a great town. Atchison does a really fantastic job of keeping the spirit and soul of Amelia Earhart alive and well. And for those who are listening and don't know of Atchison's connection to Amelia Earhart was born and raised in Atchison, Kansas. As a matter of fact, the home that she was born and raised in, her grandparents' home, right on Santa Fe and North Terrace, is about 5 blocks away from where I'm sitting right now. It's now the Amelia Earhart Birthplace Museum. It's run by the 99s, and it is done a phenomenal job of keeping her legacy alive. And every year, Atchison hosts a phenomenal festival called the Amelia Earhart Festival. It's usually the second or third weekend in July of every year, and they have a concert on the lake, and they have a birthday party, a birthday cake for Amelia Earhart, and they have the greatest fireworks show and aviation spectacle you've ever seen. And it's over the Missouri River, and it's just really, really remarkable. And it's a celebration of Amelia Earhart's impact and legacy. And so it seemed to me, I kind of liken it like an author who writes thrillers, and they're writing a thriller about a town in Alaska, for instance. It's set in a town in Alaska. So they decide to move there for a few months to sort of get in that mindset and to help their creative juices flow. And that's sort of the decision I made. I thought, if we could move to Atchison, if we can get into the right mindset, then we can create, and we can put this thing together in a way that's never really been done. And Atchison's been phenomenal. And so that's where we are right now. And it is Earhart country. Well, Kansas in general is Earhart country, but Atchison especially is really ground zero for Earhart country. They have the last remaining Lockheed Electra 10E on the planet. Muriel is her name, and she is parked waiting for a new hangar to be built as we speak, a beautiful museum and hangar that's being built for her. And that is being done right now, and hopefully will be done within a year or so. And they have the birthplace home. They've got Trinity Church, where Amelia Earhart was baptized. They've got the United States Post Office that was just named in Amelia Earhart's honor. They really do a great job. And it's one of those things that if you're going to do an Earhart project, especially one like what we're doing, I don't see a place anywhere really that's better than moving to Atchison, Kansas. And so that's why we came here, and it's been an incredible ride so far.
Wow. So would you describe yourself as sort of like an aviator with a passion for history, or a historian that likes aviation, or is there any connection to that at all with you?
Well, I'm not an aviator. I have never flown. I mean, I should correct that. I have flown a couple times with people in the plane. I have actually, taken the reins and flown a couple times. Nothing too crazy, nothing to write home about. But I am really more of a history freak. That's really the best way to describe me. I love history, especially U.S. history. It's sort of been my forte ever since I was a kid. I've always been passionate for that. And so I'm really just a really big history nerd. I have a lot of respect for folks who study history, who are historians, and who learn our country's past, and who learn about icons of the past like Earhart and so many countless others. And I liken myself to those kind of folks. I really am more of a historian than anything else. But aviation in general is just, the history of aviation from the Wright brothers on has just been, remarkable, the stuff that we've learned in this project. And really the experts are certainly not me. The experts are the people that we have on the show and that we have on the documentary. And those folks I learn so much for on a continual basis. So if I had to pick one, I'd say I definitely skew a lot more towards historian that just has a side passion for aviation.
Sure. I mean, aviation is very, very rich in stories. That's for sure. There's no lack of history there, even though the history is only, a little over 100 years.
Right.
It's about as jam-packed as you're going to get. So who's your target audience then for this? I mean, are you looking mostly at people that are into history, or are a lot of aviator types really into this, or who listens to your podcast?
That's another good question. Our target audience is really young folks. We really want to try to inspire a lot of young people, and we have. I think that's been really great. We've opened the eyes of a lot of young folks to Amelia Earhart's story. Most people, when you say women in aviation, people would generally say Amelia Earhart. I don't think people are going to hit you with, Florence Klingensmith or Ruth Elder or Ruth Nichols or Pancho Barnes. They're probably not going to hit you with that, but they're going to hit you with Amelia Earhart. But when you ask them, well, what do you know about Amelia Earhart? They're going to say, yeah, she was that famous pilot that disappeared, right? Or she crashed in the ocean, or she, whatever. They don't really know a whole lot about it. So one of our jobs is to certainly cater to what we call the Earhart community, which is really a lot of passionate individuals who study Earhart's disappearance, are subscribed to one hypothesis or another, are aviators in one way, shape, or form. But we really are trying to cater to a lot of the younger folks and try to educate them just a little more on who Earhart was as a person. And so that's our target audience. But I think our built-in audience is the people that are just Earhart fanatics, people that are fascinated by her life, that have read every book that's out there on Earhart, that are hardcore subscribers to one theory or another. And they might listen to us just so they can gain perspective on other theories, just so they can put their 2 cents in about other theories, so they can learn more about Amelia Earhart that they didn't really, learn before, things like that. So what we're trying to do is sort of try to change the status quo and try to get younger folks involved in Earhart's life and her career. And I think we're slowly but surely starting to do that. So that's really kind of great. So our target audience is that, but our built-in audience is definitely the Earhart community.
So what do you think on a personal level? I mean, do you think that there's some wreckage lying somewhere out there? Do you think that something more sinister was at play, or what do you feel really happened to her?
That's a question. That's probably the number one question I get asked all the time. And truthfully, I don't know what happened to her. And, I argue this all the time. Maybe it doesn't matter what happened to her. The more I dive deeper into this, the more folks I talk to, the more I learn about it, I start to have this idea that sort of creeps into the back of my mind that really asks the question that's kind of a hard one to ask. Does it really matter at this point what happened to her? Does Amelia Earhart sort of belongs to history now? Her and Fred Noonan belong to all of us. So one of the things that I think is the most fascinating aspect about what we're doing, and one of the greatest things that I've discovered, has to do with the birthplace home here in Atchison. And I have read letters that are in the birthplace home from little girls who still write to Amelia Earhart after all these years, hoping that Amelia Earhart will write back because she is that important to them. She is a hero to them. And so as far as, you know, what I believe, I really think it's irrelevant. I think any one of these hypotheses can be it. I really do. And I think it's a possibility that, you know, you can't rule out that maybe a combination of these hypotheses might be correct. Maybe a little bit of this, a little bit of that kind of mixes up to make the ultimate fate of what happened to Earhart and Noonan that day. So it's really difficult. I liken it to those people who test cars. It's like my favorite analogy. They get this car and they get to test it for a week, and it's like the best car ever. It's got everything on it, and they get the next car that they're supposed to test it. Oh my God, this is the best car ever. It's got everything on it. You know, it's like they can never, like the next thing is always better than the one they had before. I think what's really interesting, and I would challenge your listeners to do this, is go down the rabbit hole, and you don't even have to go down the full rabbit hole. You can just pick a theory, any one of them. It doesn't matter. If you subscribe more to the idea that she ended up in the ocean with Fred Noonan on that day, and that's what happened, and the plane lies at the bottom of the ocean. If you believe that she was in fact captured by the Japanese and it was in Japanese custody and either died on that island in Saipan or in the Marshall Islands, or you know she died of dysentery or was executed, just pick any one of, pick the Buka hypothesis that's really been making the rounds lately. That's all over the world right now, and just look into that. I can promise you that if you look at the evidence and you listen to the parties involved in presenting that evidence, you will be bought and sold by that hypothesis. You will believe it wholeheartedly. However, you look at the next one, and that's when you're going to start having problems. And it's truly the definition of a rabbit hole. So is there wreckage somewhere? There very well could be. Bill Snavely could be onto something. It could be at the bottom of the ocean. It could be off the shores of Nicaragua. It's one of those things that just, you know, it's impossible to be able to tell you what I think, because every day we get reintroduced to fresh pieces of information as a team, or we find out something new that, you know, we might be convinced for a brief moment on one particular hypothesis, and then we're pulled back into the fray with another one or with multiple. So it's too hard for me to tell you, you know, really what I think. I just think that one of these folks, I think that somebody's got the answer. I think that somebody's cracked this case already. And I think that it's just a matter of when that we discover the true fate of Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan. And I'm hoping and praying that one of these folks and one of these investigations turns up either a smoking gun or turns up some kind of finality to this case. So that way people can stop arguing about what they feel happened.
All right. So let's just say this. Hypothetically, somebody does an expedition. Somebody says, you know what, I've got a theory. I'm going to send divers here, and they find it, right? Mm-hmm. So the mystery is basically solved. Here's the wreckage. You know, I doubt there would be remains, but here's the wreckage. So more or less we know what went down. What happens to Chris and the Earhart project?
Well, that's a good question. If, let's say theoretically that somebody, let's say they find the plane in the ocean tomorrow morning, and they pull this thing out of the water, and it's definitively determined to be the Electra, I think the balance of chasing Earhart shifts drastically, because we now have an answer as to what happened. I think if they were to find absolute proof that it was on Nicaragua, for instance, or if the folks working Japanese capture found some absolute proof that they were there, and it was a genuine exception by or acceptance, I should say, by the general public that this is what happened, then I think chasing Earhart shifts, and we basically work with those folks to tell the story, the final story of what happened to Amelia Earhart, and that's kind of how the project would evolve. I think the position that we're in as a team is very unique in the idea that we are working with all of these folks. We are essentially promoting all of these folks. We are not promoting one theory over another. We're promoting all of the theories. And the idea is that there has been this spectacular collapse of collaboration in this case over the course of the last 81 years. And we are trying to be a catalyst for change. We're trying to get these folks that are much smarter than us to reach across the aisle and to stop arguing and to put all of the data on the table, utilize the inductive reasoning method, really just put everything together and see who might have a piece of the puzzle that might fit. And hopefully we're starting to see some of that happen now. Hopefully that will continue to happen, and it will exceed our expectations of what we always thought. But I think if the plane were to be found, I think if Bill Snavely and Project Blue Angel were to find the team or the plane, it doesn't really matter who. I think it would definitely change our outlook, and we would basically shift at least the disappearance aspect of it. We would shift that to that last hypothesis, the one that definitively closed the case. But I can tell you without hesitation that the legacy wouldn't change. I think it would still remain the same. It would be business as usual, but maybe it would help write the series finale to the one of the greatest mysteries ever. So I think it would just be one of those things we'd have to just sort of roll with the punches with.
Okay, yeah, I mean, and you kind of touched on it there. I was going to ask you, assuming that they did find the answer, whatever the answer may be, do you think that her legacy would continue to be inspirational to little girls, and that they would still continue to write letters and still continue to be just like you were, just inspired by her story?
Absolutely. I think there's no question that her legacy, the disappearance is irrelevant to her legacy. We like to say that the disappearance now has its own legacy, which is interesting in its own aspect, because it sort of does. The disappearance itself has spawned another life to Amelia Earhart that was never intentionally meant to be there. So it was one of those things where it just sort of happened. And I think regardless of who finds it, I think regardless of what the final outcome is, her legacy stands, right? I mean, we've done 72 episodes now talking about impact and legacy, and I can promise you that the little girls that come, see our when we're on set shooting film segments or whatever, and there's little girls that come up to us in full cosplay as Amelia Earhart, I can promise you that the countless movies, television, comic books, pop culture that include Amelia Earhart in their stories and do these fantastical, variations of Amelia Earhart's final journey and things, none of that would end. I think all of these people that are inspired by Amelia Earhart would continue to be inspired just as much. And I think finding the plane, let's say they bring it out of the ocean tomorrow or find it on an island. I think if that plane was brought into the Smithsonian or something like that and sat right next to her Lockheed Vega that's in the Smithsonian, I think that would reintroduce Amelia Earhart on a level you can't possibly imagine to little kids all over the world, boys and girls. There's a woman who looked fear in the eye and just didn't flinch and just went for it. And she very well knew that when she took off for this world flight, that there was a very good chance that she would never return. And it didn't change anything. It didn't. It was one of those things where it's like, yeah, fear of death, fear of not returning is a possibility, but she famously said, I'm basically more or less mortgaging my future to go on here, but what are futures for? You take the risk, you go for it. And I think that's really her legacy is if you're on the fence about something, if you think you can't do it, if you think you're not good enough, if you don't have hope, look at me and look what I did. And it's not about what I could do. It's about what everyone can do. And I think that legacy will stand regardless of what happened to her. I think what's interesting about her story, and a lot of people really don't focus on this aspect of it, regardless of what theory is correct, it's not a good outcome. Amelia Earhart did not meet a good outcome, regardless of what theory is correct. So she either ditched in her plane in the ocean and slowly drowned in the ocean. She was executed on Saipan and pushed into a grave, or she died of dysentery alone in a jail cell. She crashed and sank off the shores of Buka, would have been fatally injured and sank with the plane in the shores of Buka. She died alone as a castaway on Nicomaroro after Fred Noonan died, and was on Nicomaroro for God knows how long by herself. She returned to the United States and lived out her life as another person, never being able to talk to anyone, never being able to fly again, essentially dying inside and living a lonely life. I mean, there is no happy ending to Amelia Earhart's story, regardless of what theory you subscribe to. And I know some people will listen to the theories I just listed and think, well, that one's ridiculous. That doesn't matter. The point is whatever happened to this woman, it wasn't pleasant. And I think that ties into her story. She knew that it wasn't going to be pleasant. She knew that there was a good chance that she would not live happily ever after, and she took that chance anyway. And I think that's the legacy right there.
How do you think her legacy would have been different had she actually completed the trip?
Oh gosh, that's one of the funnest ways to speculate. We talk about that all the time on the podcast. The sky's the limit. You can really take your pick. You can really write her legacy however you want. What's really interesting about Amelia Earhart's last flight is she famously told her husband, GP George Putnam, that, look, this is it for me. I'm done after this with long distance stunt flying. This is going to be it. Would she have flown again? Absolutely. I have no doubt that she would have flown again. Would she have taken on long distance stunt flying and stuff like that? Probably not. She would have. There are a few things that we can be fairly certain on. Nothing is a slam dunk, but there's a few things we can be fairly certain on. One of them is that she would have most certainly continued her relationship with Purdue University. That was only about a year and a half old before she left for the world flight and subsequently disappeared. So she hadn't really got a chance to tap into that relationship and take advantage of that platform. And I know she would have done that. I know that she loved communicating with women on a one-on-one intimate basis. I know she loved shaping futures of women and taking a direct influence on that. So I think that would have been almost certainly a part of her career, her post-flight career. I think she would have definitely continued on the lecture circuit and went around the country and maybe even around the world and lectured. I think she would have been huge for aviation in general as a face to help promote not only women in aviation, which was her most important cause, but I think she would have promoted aviation in general. There was touches of that in some of her speeches, that aviation should be promoted in general, and it was the next big thing, and it was safe to fly, and it was, all these great things. And I think that she would have possibly taken a role in being not only the face for women in aviation, but just aviation in general, because she was America's sweetheart at the time, and she was arguably the most famous person on the planet when she disappeared. Another way to speculate is maybe her involvement in World War II. I certainly don't think she would have joined the military and stepped up and done that, but I think Amelia Earhart would have really pushed for women in aviation, women in the military, women in general for flying in the military. I think she would have been a huge advocate for the WASP program. Jackie Cochran was one of her closest friends, and Jackie Cochran went on to found the WASP. I think she would have been so very proud of Jackie and the WASP and what they were doing. And I think that she would have done everything in her power to help push the WASP and to really get them out there more. I think there's a possibility that she could have been a political powerhouse. She had political aspirations. She was very close dear friends with Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think if she wanted to get into politics, if she wanted to sort of kind of, tiptoe into that, I think she might have had a good shot at that. I mean, there's just so many great things you can speculate about. Amelia Earhart Flight School, which was a possibility. She could have taught women to fly. The list goes on and on and on. But I think, it's really fun to speculate on. But I think she would have definitely lectured. She would have definitely continued with Purdue. And we would have just all had to sit back and see what she would have done after that.
I could not be happier that you just mentioned the Purdue thing, because I was about to ask you anyway. So Purdue, of course, is my alma mater. That's where I went to school. Some of my friends lived in Earhart Hall. I mean, there are numerous things named after her there. I want to hear more about her connection with Purdue.
Yeah, Purdue, it happened by accident. She was doing a lecture, and it was a lecture that happened to be witnessed by the then president of Purdue, who was so enthralled by her lecturing and her ability to capture an audience that he said, "Hey, I would love to have you come to Purdue and speak to our women, speak to our young students." And he wanted her to come on as an advisor. He couldn't hire her on as a professor or anything like that, but he saw the need for her as an advisor. And she jumped at that opportunity. Purdue was a big deal at the time, still is now, of course, as you know. And Purdue was sort of cutting edge at the time. I think she saw something in Purdue because Purdue, was the only university that had an airport at the time. It was something that was sort of, it just spoke to her. It was a good connection. It was sort of a meant to be style connection. And she jumped at that opportunity. It was a chance for her to lecture to students and to touch lives one-on-one and inspire one-on-one. And interestingly enough about Purdue, we had Susan Butler on the show, who is the author for East to the Dawn, which is one of the most definitive biographies ever written on Amelia Earhart. And it was the basis for the 2009 Hilary Swank film, Amelia. And Susan talked to me about her connection to Purdue. And she mentioned that when she was researching the book, she reached out. She put an op-ed in the Purdue, I don't know if it was one of the newspapers for Purdue or something like that. And she said, hey, I'm writing this book on Amelia Earhart, and I would really love it if there were any women that are still alive that were at Purdue at the time that Amelia was there, or if there was women, the daughters of women that were there or whatever, to talk to me about your experiences with Amelia Earhart, or if you had letters or something like that. I'd love to see them. And interestingly enough, there were some women that were alive, that were still alive, that were there at Purdue at the time that Earhart was lecturing, and got to experience that Earhart connection one-on-one. And she received countless letters of women saying, I was going to just get a standard degree. I was just going to get married and be a housewife and have a degree. But after hearing Amelia speak, I decided to become an engineer. I decided to become an aviator. I decided to get into, I became a mathematician. She shaped people's lives. She changed people's lives because they saw this woman who was shattering glass ceilings and breaking boundaries and setting aviation records, doing all these incredible things. And she was talking specifically to them. It's almost like if you're a kid now and you're doing something and you're a big football fan, and your hero, your favorite football player visits your university and speaks to you and tells you can do this, you can do that. It's a good source of inspiration. It's one that rarely comes. And so Amelia Earhart just had this incredible relationship with Purdue, so much so that Purdue financed her Lockheed Electra 10E, her flying laboratory, as they called it. They wanted her to do scientific tests with this, to try to test the air quality and the water quality and stuff while she was going around the world. I mean, they were getting her to start dipping her feet into different things that were not aviation. Amelia Earhart was actually building a lab in Purdue, was consulting on a lab build in Purdue that was going to be a lab that actually had engines, WASP engines in it that women could actually go in there and work on and tinker with and know the ins and outs of aviation, know the ins and outs of these airplanes that they were flying, and to not only be pilots and aviators, but to actually know, prop to tail a lot about, the airplanes that they were flying. So her relationship with Purdue, I think, was really unique. It was really sort of cutting edge at the time. And it's really too bad that she never returned, because I would have loved to have seen what that relationship would have blossomed into, and what she would have continued to do with Purdue. It would have been, it was just getting started, and it's just a really tragic shame that she never got to take full advantage of that and to do the second part of her career that she really wanted to do so bad.
Well, I'll tell you what, that makes two of us.
Yeah.
So what's next for Chris and the Earhart project then?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are so a couple of things. As I said earlier, we just kicked off. We just released episode 72 with, we actually released it to our patrons. So we have a Patreon that we do, and we released it to our patrons. Get all of our episodes a day earlier before even our subscribers do. So we released that, and the episode's actually going out to subscribers tonight, and it's going to go live on all podcast platforms and everything tomorrow. And that's going to feature Dorothy Cochran and Tom Crouch from the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, which is an interview I've been wanting to do for a very long time. They were very generous with me and giving us a good interview. We just kicked off a second podcast that I'm extremely proud of. I've taken that as my personal project, my pet project within a project, so to speak. And the name of the podcast is Vanished Amelia Earhart. And it is, we just released our third episode of that. And it is going to be a 15 or 16 episode run. It's going to be a limited run, and it's going to focus on Amelia Earhart's, early days and what made her so popular and what made her such an iconic figure. And then as we get into episode 6, I believe it is, we're about to release episode 4 next weekend. Episode 6 will be kind of the turning point, which is going to be all about Hawaii and the ground loop incident at Luke Field in Hawaii and how that changed everything. And then we're going to get into the theories, all the different varying theories on what happened to her, and those are going to be much more robust episodes. And we're gonna put that out. The way it works now is we rotate our podcast, so every weekend everybody gets content. We're releasing content on a weekly basis. So this weekend is an episode of Chasing Earhart. Next week it's an episode of Vanished Amelia Earhart, and we rotate accordingly back and forth until Vanished is completed. And we are going to be working on the documentary. 2019 is going to be a hugely aggressive push from our team. And we have some very exciting things that are happening on the documentary front right now, things we've been waiting for a very long time that hopefully we'll be able to talk about and announce in the near future. But it's one of those things where we're putting this thing together full steam ahead, and I'm hoping to have the documentary wrapped up and out for distribution, hopefully by the end of 2019, maybe this time 2020, about a year from now. And we'll be running a little bit behind. I wanted to have it completely done by the end of 2019, but stuff gets in the way, and we have to push really hard this year to make that deadline. So we're busy. We're very busy, and we're grateful, and we're blessed, and we're just going to continue doing this and trying to tell this woman's story, and hopefully by the end of all this, we will have made some kind of change, we will have been some kind of catalyst for change. And that's what we have. That's always what we wanted from the beginning. So,
something tells me that we'll find out the answer in my lifetime, and hopefully Chris will be involved somehow, at least in getting to the bottom of it. I like that Chris's project is an aviation-based topic, but that anybody can enjoy it. There's just so much history and mystery in the story of Amelia Earhart that you don't have to give a toss about aviation to get it. But if you do, well, and that makes it all the better. If you're not already listening to Chasing Earhart, well, you should be. There's a link right there in the show notes so that you can go subscribe right after this episode's over. The show's available just about anywhere you can get podcasts, like wherever you're listening to this one. So go check it out. Today's show is brought to you by the generous support of listeners like you through Patreon. To become a supporter yourself, go to patreon.com/podcastingonaplane to get started. You'll be in great company, and you get access to periodic patron-only content that doesn't make it on the podcast, plus my gratitude, for whatever that's worth. Today's show music is produced by Gunnar Jonsson, with additional audio help from Chris Curran. That's all for now. Your frequency change is approved until next time, and report back on this frequency for the next episode. Good day.
The Podcasting on a Plane podcast is presented for entertainment purposes only. Brandon's comments and those of his guests, the website's content, and any of the social media, etc., are not part of his official responsibility as a controller or as an FAA employee. The views and opinions you hear on this podcast are his and those of his guests, and not necessarily that of the FAA. There is no nexus between Podcasting on a Plane and the FAA. Also, while he's a CFI, he's not acting as your CFI, nor is he your mechanic, your doctor, your shrink, or your spouse. This podcast is presented for entertainment, camaraderie, and fun, but is in no way, shape, or form professional advice or legal counsel. If you're in need of professional advice, get some from somewhere more appropriate than a podcast, no matter how good this one may be.